Hollywood has a system. It discovers you, shapes you, markets you, and if you play along, it rewards you. But the moment you stop fitting the image they created for you, the system turns cold. It pulls back support, rewrites narratives, and quietly moves on. Right now, whether Hollywood wants to admit it or not, Sydney Sweeney is exposing the cracks in that system. Not by being loud, not by rebelling publicly, not by attacking anyone directly, but by doing something far more dangerous in the entertainment industry. She stopped asking for permission. And that single shift is the reason Hollywood can't control Sydney Sweeney anymore. Sydney Sweeney was never supposed to become this powerful. She wasn't meant to outgrow the image that was carefully sold to the public. She wasn't meant to survive the internet backlash, the criticism, the overexposure debates, and still come out stronger. And yet, here she is, more booked, more talked about, and more influential than ever. The uncomfortable truth is that Hollywood helped create her rise, but now it doesn't know how to manage what she's become. Hollywood thrives on formulas. It loves predictability. It loves control. It loves knowing exactly who an actor is supposed to be before the audience even decides how it feels about them. For decades, this formula has worked. A young actress is discovered, branded early, given specific roles, coached on what to say, how to dress, and what kind of star she's allowed to become. Most never escape that box. Some don't even realize they're trapped inside it. Sydney Sweeney entered that system quietly.
No controversy, no scandals.
No dramatic breakout moment designed to shock the industry. She played the roles, followed the rules, and climbed step by step. But unlike most, she didn't confuse opportunity with ownership. And when the moment came, she walked out of the box without asking for approval. Hollywood noticed, but by then it was already too late. This is the story of how Sydney Sweeney moved from being controlled by the industry to becoming someone the industry can no longer control. And to understand how that happened, we have to go back to the beginning, before the fame, before the obsession, and before the world decided it had an opinion about who Sydney Sweeney was supposed to be. Before the red carpets, the magazine covers, and the viral moments, Sydney Sweeney's journey was quiet, relentless, and almost invisible. She wasn't handed a golden ticket. She worked. Audition after audition, callback after callback, often competing against dozens, sometimes hundreds, of other hopefuls who were just as hungry. There were days of rejection, of roles lost to luck or timing, and nights spent wondering if all the effort would ever pay off. Yet, through it all, Sydney kept showing up. Every script read, every scene performed, and every networking moment was a deliberate step toward something bigger, a career she could own. What set Sydney apart wasn't just talent, it was discipline. While many young actors relied on charm, hype, or viral moments to get noticed, Sydney invested in her craft. She studied, she practiced, she honed. Small roles in independent projects, guest appearances on television shows, and minor film parts weren't seen as just stepping stones for her. They were opportunities to learn, to grow, and to prove that she belonged. This relentless grind might not have made headlines at the time, but it built the foundation for the powerhouse she would become. And yet, even in these early stages, you could sense something different about Sydney. There was a quiet confidence in the way she approached her work, a subtle awareness that she wasn't simply chasing fame. She was building something lasting. It's a rare trait in Hollywood, where the pressure to perform often overrides long-term strategy. But Sydney understood that the real power wasn't in being noticed, it was in being untouchable by the whims of the industry. It was during this early grind that the first seeds of what Hollywood would later find unmanageable were planted. She learned how the system worked, the casting directors, the agents, the producers, and she learned how to navigate it without losing herself. By the time she landed the projects that would eventually define her career, Sydney Sweeney wasn't just an actress. She was a professional with an invisible armor, prepared to face the chaos of stardom on her own terms. And that brings us to the turning point, the role that would change everything. A role that would thrust her into the spotlight, force the world to notice, and test whether Hollywood could control someone who had already learned to control herself. Everything changed the moment Sydney Sweeney stepped into Euphoria. Suddenly, the quiet grind, the countless auditions, and the years of preparation collided with a spotlight she could never have predicted. The show wasn't just popular, it became a cultural phenomenon. Every scene, every expression, every subtle nuance of her performance was dissected, shared, and celebrated online. Fans didn't just watch her, they obsessed over her. Social media exploded with admiration. GIFs of her moments went viral, and suddenly, Sydney wasn't just an actress anymore. She was a symbol, a trend, and a conversation starter. The fame came fast, and with it, the scrutiny. People analyzed her roles, her interviews, even her personal style. Some praised her authenticity, her craft, and her confidence. Others tried to define her, to box her into a narrative Hollywood was comfortable with. But Sydney didn't follow the rules of being a marketable star. She didn't try to please everyone or adjust her image to fit a mold. She remained calm, poised, and, most importantly, true to herself. That authenticity only amplified the fascination. Fans felt they were witnessing someone real, someone unpolished yet magnetic, and the internet responded with the intensity of a tidal wave. This was the first moment Hollywood noticed that Sydney Sweeney wasn't just another rising actress. They realized she might be unpredictable. Networks, producers, and PR teams who were used to shaping young talent suddenly had less control than they expected. Every viral clip, every trending post, every fan thread online was beyond their management. Sydney's image was no longer theirs to curate. The public was taking over the narrative, and she didn't push back. She let it flow, confident that the work she put in would speak louder than any manufactured persona. And the attention didn't stop at admiration. Critics and social media users alike debated her every move, sometimes harshly, sometimes obsessively. But rather than being shaken, Sydney adapted. She learned how to navigate the intensity, how to maintain boundaries, and how to allow her rising star to shine without being consumed by it. That ability to balance skyrocketing fame with control over her own image marked the beginning of a shift. Sydney Sweeney was no longer just a Hollywood product. She was a force the industry couldn't fully dictate. By the end of the first season of Euphoria, it was clear Sydney Sweeney had arrived. And not just arrived, she had arrived on her own terms, quietly redefining what it meant to be a young actress in Hollywood. Fans were obsessed. Media outlets were scrambling. And Hollywood? They were realizing, perhaps too late, that they didn't have the strings to pull anymore. With fame comes attention, and with attention comes scrutiny. For Sydney Sweeney, the moment she became a household name, the internet transformed from a platform of admiration into a double-edged sword. Fans celebrated her performances, shared every red carpet look, and dissected her interviews for clues about her next move. But alongside that admiration came criticism, rumors, and the kind of online chatter that could crush careers overnight. Social media users debated her choices, her personal life, and even her expressions on screen. Every post, every appearance, every smile was analyzed, judged, and shared thousands of times, often without context. What made this period particularly intense was the sheer scale of obsession. Memes, viral threads, TikTok compilations, people weren't just talking about Sydney. They were obsessing over her. Some comments were flattering, some were cruel, and some were downright invasive. And yet, unlike many actors who crumble under the weight of constant judgment, Sydney remained composed. She understood the rules of the digital age. You cannot control the internet, but you can control how it affects you. She chose her responses carefully, stayed focused on her craft, and allowed the public to create their own narratives while keeping her personal life mostly private. This wasn't just resilience, it was strategy. Sydney learned early that controversy can amplify attention, but only if it doesn't compromise your integrity. She navigated the backlash with grace, deflecting negative energy and letting her work speak louder than the gossip. By doing so, she flipped the script. Instead of being a victim of online obsession, she became its center, but on her own terms. The more people tried to define her, the more she defined herself through talent, professionalism, and a subtle yet undeniable charisma. Hollywood, of course, noticed. Executives, agents, and PR teams began realizing that Sydney Sweeney operated under a different set of rules. The same online frenzy that could destroy careers had strengthened hers. The industry had created a machine meant to control stars, but Sydney had learned to ride it instead of being consumed by it. This phase of intense internet obsession was not just a challenge, it was a proving ground. And Sydney didn't just survive it. She emerged stronger, more untouchable, and even more impossible for Hollywood to control. By the end of this period, the message was clear. Sydney Sweeney was no longer just a rising actress caught in Hollywood's web. She was someone who had learned to thrive in the very chaos that could have ended others. And this was only the beginning. The public obsession, the scrutiny, and the debates over her image would continue, but Sydney was no longer reacting. She was leading the narrative. As Sydney Sweeney's fame skyrocketed, something subtle but powerful began to happen behind the velvet ropes of Hollywood. The industry that once carefully guided her career, the producers, agents, and PR teams, started to feel uneasy. Hollywood thrives on predictability. It likes stars it can mold, celebrities it can package, and actors whose images can be controlled to fit campaigns, brands, and box office expectations. Sydney, however, was no longer following the script. She wasn't a product. She was a presence. And presence, when it refuses to be tamed, makes powerful people nervous. Executives whispered. Agents recalibrated. Directors questioned whether her rising independence would clash with their projects. It wasn't about talent. Sydney's talent was undeniable. It was about control. Hollywood had created her, invested in her, and now the very system that built her success realized it had limited influence over the woman it once thought it owned. Every confident interview, every carefully curated social media post, and every bold role she accepted reminded the industry that she was no longer a pawn. They had inadvertently helped raise a queen. This discomfort rippled into projects, casting decisions, and media coverage. Some insiders tried to gently steer her back into the mold of the compliant young star, offering roles that were safe, interviews that were scripted, and opportunities that felt controlled. But Sydney had learned the rules of the game long before Hollywood became uncomfortable. She politely declined, stayed selective, and continued building a career path that reflected her priorities, not theirs. That refusal to bend quietly, without fanfare, sent a clear signal. Sydney Sweeney wasn't just rising. She was redefining the rules of Hollywood success for herself. The industry's unease also spilled into public perception. Paparazzi narratives tried to frame her choices as risky, media outlets speculated about controversial decisions, and social media debates questioned whether she could sustain her career without compromising. Yet every attempt to contain her or question her trajectory only amplified her influence. Fans rallied, discussions went viral, and Sydney's image, confident, independent, unbothered, became even stronger. Hollywood had created a star, but it no longer controlled the story. And that loss of control, in an industry obsessed with control, marked a turning point. By the end of this phase, the message was unmistakable. Sydney Sweeney wasn't just a rising actress. She was a force Hollywood had to reckon with. The industry's discomfort didn't diminish her. It validated her power. For the first time, it became clear that she was steering her own narrative, on her own terms, and no one in Hollywood had the final word. This is where the story truly changes. Sydney Sweeney went from being a talented actress navigating Hollywood's machine to becoming a woman who controls her own image, career, and narrative. The power had quietly shifted. Every role she accepted, every public appearance she made, and every interview she gave was no longer dictated by the industry's expectations. Instead, Sydney used her growing influence to craft a persona that was authentic, magnetic, and untouchable. She wasn't seeking approval. She was setting the standard. The industry noticed, but by this point it was too late. Hollywood had built her platform, but Sydney had learned to wield it. She carefully selected projects that not only showcased her range as an actress, but also reinforced the public perception of her as confident and autonomous. She understood that every decision, big or small, was a statement. Whether attending a high-profile event, posting on social media, or giving an interview, she was sending a message. Sydney Sweeney plays by her own rules, not Hollywood's. This power shift wasn't loud or confrontational. It was strategic, subtle, and incredibly effective. Fans, media, and even critics began to see a consistent pattern. Sydney wasn't someone who could be molded or manipulated. She was a star who made deliberate choices, maintained control over her image, and thrived under scrutiny. And the results spoke for themselves. Every carefully chosen role, every viral appearance, and every positive media spotlight reinforced her autonomy. Sydney wasn't just surviving Hollywood's system, she was mastering it. Perhaps most importantly, this shift changed the conversation about what it means to be a young actress in Hollywood. For decades, actresses were expected to follow scripts written by studios, executives, and PR teams. But Sydney demonstrated that it's possible to rise, excel, and maintain personal authority in an industry built on control. This wasn't rebellion for attention, it was power in action. And as her career trajectory continued to ascend, one fact became undeniable. Hollywood no longer dictated Sydney Sweeney's story, she did. By the end of this phase, it was clear that Sydney's power wasn't about fame alone. It was about control, strategy, and resilience. She had become the star Hollywood could no longer shape, predict, or contain. And that's a truth that would echo throughout the rest of her career. By the time Sydney Sweeney fully controlled her career, a new phenomenon emerged: the public obsession, especially among men, and the media frenzy that followed. It wasn't just about her performances. It was about her presence. The internet and social media amplified every glance, every fashion choice, and every statement she made. Memes, threads, and fan pages dedicated to Sydney multiplied, creating a level of fascination that blurred the lines between admiration and obsession. Men, young and old, casual scrollers and diehard fans alike, became ardent defenders of her image online. They debated her choices, celebrated her achievements, and rallied whenever criticism arose. This wasn't merely fandom, it was a reflection of Sydney's authenticity and relatability. People weren't just seeing a character on screen, they were seeing the real woman behind the roles. And that authenticity, combined with her refusal to be molded by Hollywood, created an irresistible magnetism. Media outlets noticed this obsession and tried to package it, write it, and control the narrative, but they couldn't. Every attempt to define Sydney for the public failed because her fans had already taken ownership of the story. The narrative wasn't about Hollywood anymore. It was about the connection between Sydney and the people who admired her. Men in particular seemed to take on a protective energy. When criticism or rumors arose, social media threads exploded with defenders. It was almost as if the public instinctively understood that Sydney wasn't just a star. They understood that she represented something rare in Hollywood, a young actress who could thrive on her own terms. That combination of independence, talent, and calculated charm created a cultural phenomenon that extended far beyond traditional fan bases. It became impossible for Hollywood or mainstream media to control the conversation. Even journalists, entertainment outlets, and influencers began to comment on this dynamic. They noted how the reactions weren't just admiration. They were defense, obsession, and genuine investment in her trajectory. Sydney had unintentionally sparked a movement. Fans were no longer passive observers. They were active participants in shaping her image and protecting her narrative. And every post, every article, and every viral clip only reinforced this pattern. Hollywood may have built the stage, but the audience, and Sydney herself, was now running the show. By the end of this chapter in her story, the truth was undeniable. Sydney Sweeney wasn't just a talented actress. She was a cultural phenomenon, and the reactions from men, fans, and media alike were proof of the unique position she held in modern celebrity culture. She wasn't being controlled. She was being watched, followed, and fiercely protected by a public that recognized her power. Sydney Sweeney isn't just a star of today. She's a blueprint for the future of Hollywood. The industry that once thought it could control her is now realizing a hard truth. Stars like Sydney cannot be molded, packaged, or contained. Every choice she makes, whether a bold role in a major series, a selective film project, or a carefully curated public appearance, sends a message to Hollywood executives. The old rules no longer apply. The system that once dictated who rises and who falls must now adapt because Sydney Sweeney is defining success on her own terms. Her upcoming projects signal exactly this shift. Studios and producers may hope to capitalize on her fame, but the power lies with Sydney herself. She selects scripts that challenge her, projects that amplify her artistry, and roles that reinforce her brand as confident, versatile, and in control. No longer is she simply an actor waiting for opportunity. She is a decision-maker, a curator, and a strategist. Hollywood can offer a stage, but Sydney chooses how the story is told. The public has already adapted. Fans, commentators, and social media communities follow her trajectory with a mix of admiration, fascination, and sometimes even protective obsession. Every film release or series announcement becomes a cultural event. Sydney doesn't need to play into the manufactured hype. Her reputation and talent generate anticipation organically. The audience is engaged, invested, and empowered to shape the conversation alongside her. This dynamic creates a new paradigm for Hollywood. Executives and studios are forced to rethink how they manage talent, how they market projects, and how they approach publicity. The era of controlling a rising star is over. Now, the stars themselves, if strategic, authentic, and disciplined, dictate the narrative. Sydney Sweeney is not just thriving in this new model, she is leading it. Her influence reaches beyond acting. She sets trends, shapes conversations, and inspires a generation of actors to reclaim agency over their careers. In short, the future Hollywood cannot shape is already here, and its name is Sydney Sweeney. She has proven that with intelligence, discipline, and unwavering self-confidence, an actress can rise above control, redefine success, and chart a course that even the most powerful studios must respect. And as the industry watches, it's clear that her story is just beginning. Sydney Sweeney's story is more than just the rise of a talented actress. It's a lesson in power, control, and authenticity. She entered Hollywood quietly, worked tirelessly, and navigated the industry's pressures with precision. She faced scrutiny, internet obsession, and even criticism designed to limit her. And yet, she didn't just survive. It's that rare combination of strategy, discipline, and confidence that allowed her to thrive on her own terms. Hollywood may have built the stage, but Sydney wrote her own script. Every role she chooses, every interview she gives, and every public appearance she makes sends a message. I control my story, not the industry. That is the power that makes her unstoppable. Fans see it, media sees it, and most importantly, Hollywood sees it and can't figure out how to stop it. But here's the question for you, the audience. If Sydney can rise above the system, define her own career, and thrive in the chaos of fame, what does that say about the power of authenticity today? Can any star or any person break free from expectations and claim control over their own narrative? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Do you think Sydney Sweeney has completely outsmarted Hollywood? Or is this just the beginning of a larger story? Let's hear it. Fans defending, critics debating. Everyone has a voice here. Because one thing is undeniable. Sydney Sweeney isn't just a star. She's a phenomenon, a game changer, a woman who showed the world that even in the most controlling industry on the planet, you can take the reins and win. And that, ultimately, is why Hollywood can't control Sydney Sweeney anymore.